The Nintendo GameCube is known for many things. It was the first Nintendo console to fully adopt discs as a medium for games. Its controller was very unorthodox, but somehow felt natural to use. And like many other Nintendo consoles, it featured a wide variety of rather weird peripherals that served to enhance the gameplay experience of certain games. But of the many weird peripherals that Nintendo came up with over the course of the GameCube's lifespan, there's one that stands out, and not in the way that you might think. The GameCube Microphone, which released alongside Mario Party 6 in November of 2004, was an extremely normal and sensible peripheral to release for a video game console, at least by Nintendo standards. I mean, some of the other peripherals for the GameCube were a set of bongos, a square Game Boy that attached to the bottom of your console, and a keyboard sandwiched between two halves of a controller, so the fact that Nintendo decided to put out a simple microphone for the GameCube is weird and surprising in its own right, just because it was a very normal thing to do. However, even though the GameCube microphone was a rather normal peripheral, it still was not spared the fate of many of the weird Nintendo peripherals we've talked about in the past. If you've seen any of my other videos covering these devices, you know that just because a peripheral might be cool or interesting, that doesn't necessarily mean that games will be developed for it. In the case of the GameCube microphone, a total of only 6 games ever utilized the device. These games were Mario Party 6, Mario Party 7, Karaoke Revolution Party, Odama, Chibi Robo, and Densetsu no Quizuo Ketteisen. While 6 games is a lot compared to the support some other Nintendo peripherals have gotten over the years, it's still much less than you'd like to see for any neat device like the GameCube microphone. In terms of the development of the GameCube microphone, I did a bunch of digging around on the web, but I wasn't able to gather too much information about who actually designed the device or how they went about doing it. However, that doesn't mean we don't have anything to talk about here. There are some clues sprinkled here and there that we can use to possibly point us in the right direction of the person or entity that could have designed this peripheral. Not very reassuring, I know, but just stick with me on this for a moment. One thing I've learned by looking into the history of the weird peripherals Nintendo produces is that oftentimes the company that developed the game the peripheral was initially made for had some hand in the development of the peripheral as well. And in this case, the game the peripheral launched alongside was Mario Party 6. A game developed by the studio then known as Hudson Soft. Hudson Soft had a great relationship with Nintendo for many years, developing every game in the Mario Party series up until Mario Party 8. So it stands to reason that Nintendo would at least have Hudson Soft consult on the development of a peripheral that was designed to release alongside one of their joint games. Of course, it's also possible that they had a greater or lesser influence on the GameCube microphone's development than simple consultation, but without further evidence we can't really say for sure. However, even though I don't have any more evidence of Hudson Soft's involvement, I do have some of Nintendo's. In an article by GamesIndustry.biz titled "Scansoft Speech Technology Enhances the New Mario Party 6 for Nintendo GameCube," General Manager of Nintendo's then Integrated Research and Development Division, Takeda Genyo, a man I've spoken about in pretty much every one of these weird peripheral videos, is quoted as saying, in reference to the Scansoft voice recognition software, "The software was extremely easy to integrate into Mario Party 6 and adds an incredible level of real-life interaction to the experience." So with this, we have a little bit of evidence of Nintendo's involvement in the creation of the microphone. Genyo and his team were very often involved in the development of peripherals for Nintendo's various consoles, so I'd say it's a pretty safe bet to say they had a hand in this one as well. In fact, the GameCube microphone may have been conceptualized by one of the teams Genyo mentioned in the Iwata Asks interview focused on the Wii Remote, that were tasked with coming up with peripherals that could work on the GameCube and be paired with an accompanying game. These teams were responsible for devices like the DK Bongos, the Wii Remote, and the Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix Action Pad, and in my opinion, it's very likely that one of these 20 or so teams Genyo created came up with the idea for the microphone that could be used with the GameCube. It's such a basic and straightforward concept that I'm sure one of the teams must have had the idea at some point. But before we move on, let's rewind for a moment because I just kind of breezed past a pretty major factor in the GameCube microphone's development earlier, and that is the voice recognition software used for all games associated with the device. Like I said earlier in a GamesIndustry.biz article, it is stated that the software used for the GameCube microphone was developed by a company known as Scansoft. If you want a direct quote from the article, here you go. Scansoft Inc., a global leader of speech and imaging solutions, today announced that Nintendo has implemented a Scansoft speech solution for the Nintendo GameCube game entitled Mario Party 6. Using Scansoft speech recognition, players can control and interact with game characters, adding an exciting and natural dimension to gameplay. Scansoft's involvement can also be seen on the back of the Mario Party 6 box, where they are credited with a logo at the bottom. Scansoft was a major player in the voice recognition field at the time, and based on the games industry article, it seems like they brought a lot of very interesting and useful software to the GameCube. Some of the major things the article outlines are highly accurate recognition, scalable vocabulary, children's voice support, and the multiple recognition modes. It seems like there was a lot of potential here for games to really make good use of voice commands for the first time ever, but I don't think they ever reached a level that warranted such advanced technology. Mostly games that used the microphone would have you use very simple commands like left, right, up, and down to control a character, or something very basic like that. In the article, they hype up the software by saying, "With speech technology, virtual characters can express their emotions, share their needs and answer questions, becoming unique, personalized, lifelike creatures." But that's something that we don't even have in gaming today over 15 years later. It was obviously just a way to try and get you to buy the device, but it clearly was not a realistic promise to make in 2005. I just wanted to mention that to show you guys the difference between what was promised and what we got, which was definitely not a unique, personalized, lifelike creature. We got karaoke for the GameCube. But enough about the development. Let's move on to the actual hardware of the GameCube Microphone. From an end-user perspective, the GameCube Microphone is a very simplistic device. You've got one button to press when you want to talk, and that's it. But does that mean the internals are just as simple? Not necessarily, but in this case they are. Let's start out by talking about the main microphone unit, because that's probably what everyone wants to hear about. This thing was surprisingly hard to open up the first time, but once you get the trick down, it's pretty easy. So first you've got to unscrew the 3 tri-point screws located on the back of the device with an appropriate screwdriver. Once that's done, you'd think the microphone would just pop apart, but that's not the case. You need to sort of squeeze one side of the main plastic cylinder to release it from the cap-like disc at the top and reveal the internals. Trust me, it's easier said than done. Sadly, after all that work, there really isn't much to talk about here. I feel like I say that in every video, but it's true. We've got the small round microphone that looks very similar to the one found in the middle of the DK bongos, and a rectangular board that has the contact for the membrane button used for push-to-talk. One rather odd thing about this section of the mic is that there are only 3 wires going out to the other unit. I'm not a master of circuit boards, so I can't be sure, but I think this might be because the button is wired between the mic and the memory card unit to allow for push-to-talk. So essentially, only when you have the button pressed will it read input from the mic and otherwise do nothing. You might think that then it would only need 2 wires out, but they may have built in the ability to not use push-to-talk and have the mic always on, so maybe that's why there are 3 wires as opposed to only 2. If someone out there is more knowledgeable about circuit boards, feel free to let us know in the comments. But that's really all there is to talk about in the mic unit, so let's move on to the memory card unit as I've been calling it. In order to get inside this part of the device, you will once again need to remove 3 tri-point screws, but this time 2 are small and 1 is average sized, so optimally you'd use 2 different sized drivers, but I just used the same one as before for all the screws. And just like the microphone unit, the memory card unit doesn't just come apart after you unscrew the screws. You also have to undo some clips with a spudger by inserting it into the groove between the 2 halves of the unit and sort of prying it up on both sides. But once that's done, just remove the top plastic piece and the metal shielding, and you've got an eyeful of the GameCube microphone's most important parts. Since this device plugs into the memory card port of the GameCube, you might expect some similarity to the internals of a GameCube memory card, but that isn't the case at all. The GameCube's memory cards all have just a single large chip that house the memory for your games, while this unit has 2 small chips that are completely different to the one we see on the memory cards. The smaller of the 2 chips, labeled AKM 5355VT 4N433, is most likely an analog to digital converter manufactured by Asahi Kasei Micro Devices. These chips are used to take the analog signal the microphone produces and turn it into a digital one that can be interpreted by a normal CPU or some other processor. It's very similar to the one we saw in the Wii Speak, which makes sense seeing as they are both microphones. In fact, the Wii Speak's analog to digital converter was also produced by Asahi Kasei Micro Devices, which I personally find quite interesting. As for the larger chip labeled ADI-DOL 436T13, I couldn't really find any reliable information about it online, but it was most likely made by a company known as Analog Devices that manufactures many chips associated with audio devices. If I had to guess, I'd say that based on its larger size, it's a microcontroller that was implemented to read signals from the AKM converter and send them to the GameCube for further processing, but obviously I can't be sure. And that's pretty much all there is to this particular device. One other thing I would like to mention is that the game Odama came with a holder for the microphone that attached to the controller so that you could play the game and use voice commands at the same time. I'm honestly surprised this didn't come with every game that needed the microphone because it seems like it would be super helpful. Also, there is a black version of the GameCube microphone that only came with Karaoke Revolution Party for whatever reason. The GameCube microphone was, for all intents and purposes, the most normal peripheral Nintendo released on the GameCube. But it is precisely that fact that makes it the weirdest of all peripherals on the console in my opinion. Nintendo is known for coming up with very out there ideas when it comes to peripherals, so seeing them release a simple microphone for one of their consoles was definitely a surprise. However, it didn't come without precedent. The N64 also had a microphone peripheral, much like the GameCube microphone, but in my opinion, the way that specific microphone was marketed, coupled with its design, makes it pretty weird in its own right. The GameCube microphone, on the other hand, is so normal and average in terms of design, it's almost scary. It's like I'm trying to find that aspect of Nintendo weirdness in all this, but I just can't, and that's what makes it so weird, if that makes sense. But weird or not, the GameCube microphone is another really interesting Nintendo peripheral that I'm glad I got a chance to take a long, hard look at. Hopefully you guys feel the same. But anyway, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It always means a lot to me. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard here today, consider giving the video a like. It's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Hack out. You know, you can use the GameCube microphone on the Wii with compatible games, but not on the Wii U. Literally garbage console, am I right? I'm just kidding, I love the Wii U. Don't crucify me in the comments, please.